Stewardship Chapel is designed to encourage the Dallas Seminary community to examine more closely biblical principles related to the purpose and use of money. Today's chapel speaker, Pete Chiofalo, has a unique perspective on biblical stewardship. It's encouraging to hear how God met his needs while he attended Dallas Seminary and how God continues to provide for the needs of the church where he ministers. Pete is a THM graduate of Dallas Seminary and currently serves as the senior pastor of Hillside Community Church in Keller, Texas, near Fort Worth, a church he founded in 1995. Hillside's vision could be summarized in these words: it's to be a biblically functioning community of believers so that Christ's redemptive purposes can be accomplished in the world. Pete and his wife, Gail, have 4 boys, and I would like you to join with me in welcoming Pete Chiofalo as our chapel speaker today.
As a student, I dreamed about this day, what it would be like to stand behind this pulpit on this platform, kind of the man in the middle, sandwiched in between them and really you. And the challenge of saying something meaningful to you, because I remember being a student and saying something worthy of these men. I had this fantasy. I would come into chapel back there every week, and maybe you've had this too. I had this fantasy that when I walked in the door, someone would tap you on the shoulder, somebody I didn't know, and they would say, look, our chapel speaker didn't show today. I did this over and over again. Do you think you could fill in? I said, well, I'm not prepared, but yes, I think I can. I'd like to do that. And so I can't tell you how many times that has happened to me. And then I would sit right where you're sitting, and while I was sitting there, I'd be crafting the talk that I'd be having to give, very often completely shutting out the chapel speaker and my heart pounding out of my chest like I was actually the one up there speaking. It was sick, really. The sermon always started with this very same phrase. Well, I guess you've heard our chapel speaker is a no-show. I have been asked to fill in. I'm not fully prepared, but here goes. That's what I would say every time. Still overwhelmed by the thought of being here now. Still feel a little unprepared. But when you get that blue sheet in the mail that has your name on the chapel deal, I would encourage you, if it ever happens to you, just see a physician right away. It will help you. There are a few things you should know about the hundreds of talks I prepared while I sat where you sat. Not one of those imaginary talks was on stewardship. We didn't even have Stewardship Day when I was a student. As a steward, I'm still not fully prepared. I'm growing. I battle every day doing what I'm supposed to do with the resources that God has given me. I'm still not 100% sure by any stretch I'm doing it all right. In many ways, the sermon, or I'd say talk, that I'm going to share with you today started when I arrived on this campus in fall of '88. After college, I worked for 2 years in Miami, Florida, where I'm from, on the television series Miami Vice. My family's in the movie industry, and so I was a driver in that series, and over a 9-month period, I made $80,000 for 2 years right out of college. I still don't make that now. When I got to this campus 2 years later, I hadn't given anything significantly from it, nor had I saved anything significantly, and I came here with nothing. My wife got a job making $17,000 a year. We went from $80,000 to $17,000 when we moved here. We went from a high-rise apartment in North Miami Beach to what should have been condemned seminary housing right over here in the corner. I'll never forget that because I arrived first, and it was a good thing. I got in there, got everything settled, all our stuff, and my wife flew in a day or so later, and when she opened the door, she just cried. That's all she did, was cry. I remember adjusting to that $17,000 budget. I remember the downscaling and all of that difficulty. It took a while for us even to realize what was about to happen to us. 2 months or 3 months into our time at in that housing, our electricity went off. And I was sitting at home studying one day. My wife was working, and I called the maintenance guys. I said, hey, we have no electricity here. I'm trying to study. I need this computer on. I need light. And thinking for sure there's a problem with this condemned building, right, or it should be. And they frantic. They came right over right away. I remember 2 guys. I spent almost half a day with 2 guys trying to figure out why our electricity was off. And finally, they figured out that the electric company turned it off because I had forgotten to pay the bill. Needless to say, stewardship was not on my mind when I was on this campus. We got some help budgeting by the end of that first year. Eventually, I saw a CPA. She was the CPA who was a gal who worked in the church that I began to serve at in Mid-Cities area. And I'll never forget her saying to me when she looked at our finances, she said, Pete, you don't give enough. And she said, you could give more. Now, we didn't make a lot of money then either. I know it was certainly under $30,000. And she said, you could give more. It hurt. As a seminary student, as a person who was on staff at the church this CPA attended, it really hurt to know that I hadn't rounded that stewardship corner the way I should, and I was very convicted. My wife and I began to think about that and pray and look very hard at the way we used our finances. And so we sat down. I was still a student here. I was working at a church. She was working at a school. We did the best we could with our finances, and we started to rearrange them. I mean, we flip-flopped them to where the debt ratio went way down until it was non-existent, and then finally we could give the way we wanted to give, and the giving began to increase. And I want to just tell you how Philippians chapter 4 shaped my thinking on that. Just 4 very simple principles. Because I think Paul constructs a theology of giving, and especially receiving there in chapter 4, how givers are to think. Our church is about to enter its 2nd stewardship campaign, and so some of these thoughts have been on my mind. In chapter 4 and verse 14, you remember Paul dealing with this issue at Philippi and the gift he receives. He says, nevertheless, regarding your gift, you have done well to share with me in my affliction. My first point is that as a giver, you become a participant in the advancement of the gospel in whatever you give. And the interesting thing here, that the word that Paul uses suggests that you share in it. You're a partner in it. It's partly yours. And it's interesting that he doesn't actually say gospel, but it's the affliction you're a part of. In other words, by virtue of your money, you actually sit in this jail cell with me, as he said in chapter 1, as those circumstances have fallen out rather for the furtherance of the gospel. And I thought, wow, by virtue of $1, by virtue of just money, that stuff we all use and need, I can actually participate in somebody else's ministry without actually being there and advance the gospel through them and actually endure, in many respects, in God's eyes, what they have to endure. That was powerful for me. And then I looked in verse 17, and it says, not that I seek the gift, Paul says, but I seek the profit or the fruit which increases to your account. And I thought, wait a minute, there's an account in heaven somewhere for me where whatever gains Paul makes in his ministry, that financial gift actually accrues dividends for me in eternity. That was a phenomenal thought for this very novice steward. You mean to tell me that whatever I support, God takes that little seed and like a farmer who sows it in the ground, it grows into something bigger than I could have ever imagined? That's exactly what Paul does. Or that's what he says. It's banking terminology. You know that. It's about a special eternal account. And they add up. And then number 3 says in verse 18, but I have received everything in full, and I have in abundance. He's talking about his own contentment here. And he says, but your gift, nevertheless, your gift, he says at the end of verse 18, was a fragrant aroma, an acceptable sacrifice, well-pleasing to God. Now, this is an interesting phrase, because that means everything I give actually ends up being an act of worship to God. Everything that I would give would be an act of worship to God. And more importantly, those phrases, you know, the Old Testament sacrificial system, those are terms that bring that to the forefront. And then you look in Ephesians chapter 5 and verse 2, and you remember we're motivated to love the way he loved, who gave an offering, a fragrant aroma, a sacrifice to God. Paul is comparing the Philippian gift to the kind of sacrifice Christ himself made. And isn't that the response of a worshiper? If you worship Christ, you worship someone who sacrifices. What kind of worship do you offer someone who sacrifices? A sacrificial one. It's just the natural, normal response of someone who worships Christ because he sacrificed. And then verse 19, the verse every seminary student knows well. My God shall supply all your need. And I don't know about you, but he did that for me. But this was one of those other thoughts. This verse told me that I was completely free to rearrange my life, rearrange my budget, change the way I handled my finances, go ahead and commit to advancing the kingdom, because God would take care of me if I did that. This is not about God, just meet my needs. And there are students, and I was one of those students, who said, God, just meet my needs. Although I didn't personally have any kingdom deals in the works. It was all just about me. I didn't have any kingdom deals working, but I wanted God to meet my needs. I don't think that's how it works. The last two, the one that's an act of worship, fragrant aroma and acceptable sacrifice, and the one that says, I will trust in you, or God will supply your need, those two motivations for giving are just a natural response to who God is. He's a sacrifice. He knows about sacrifice, and so we sacrifice. He's a supplier, and so we trust him. That's about response. It's just a natural response. Giving ought to be the natural response of knowing the God that you and I know. It's just who he is. But the first two are the two that personally are attractive to my soul. All right? And those I call the kingdom deal making. Be a partner with me in my affliction. Invest in eternity and the eternal dividends. Now, you know a verse, and I'm just going to read it to you real quick in Luke chapter 16, which I personally believe are the most stinging words a steward could ever hear out of the mouth of God. His master, you remember the unjust steward. And his master praised the unrighteous manager because he had acted shrewdly. For the sons of this age are more shrewd in relation to their own kind than the sons of light. And I say to you, make friends for yourself by means of the wealth of unrighteousness, so that when it fails, they will receive you into eternal dwellings. That kills me. All of a sudden, I became one of these kind of miser people and misuser of money. I became a kingdom dealer, if you will. Just someone who said, let me in on that deal. God is looking for people who want in on the deals in the kingdom. That's what he's saying. This guy was shrewd. I need people in the kingdom that shrewd with their finances. They're looking for kingdom deals. You remember the show Apprentice? I mean, think about it. If you had to sit before God and as one of his apprentices, and he's looking for someone to manage his stuff, what would he say to you right now as a steward? That's what I think the feel of Luke 16 is. I need someone who can manage kingdom deals. Now, whether you like it or not, and I've had to come to grips with this as a pastor, money impacts the kingdom. I got to be honest with you. I wish God could come up with another way. I wish that weren't true. God seems to be okay with the fact that it takes money to pull off stuff. Because I got to tell you, you can hardly do anything without it. There isn't a day that goes by in the ministry that I serve in that I don't say to myself, what kind of resources do we have? Look at the needs. What kind of resources do we have? You got to ask that question. It's your second question all the time, and it will forever be. God seems to be okay with that, I have learned. He has not brought me to the place in ministry where I don't have to ask that question anymore. So he must want me to be thinking about that. As a kingdom dealer, we give 10% of our money to the church, to our church, because we think the church is the headquarters of God's redemptive purposes in the world. It's what's working in the community. That's where Christ was given as head of it, and we want to give to it, so we do that. And we give to it joyfully. And thinking about what Paul said in terms of investing, I say, Lord, everything that accomplishes through your church, I have a stake in. And then we give to coaches outreach. And so every coach, every little dollar that goes toward helping a coach, help a high school kid move a little closer to Christ. I feel like if what Paul said is true, then I'm out on that field on Friday nights when they're coaching those high school kids in light of the gift. We've supported Young Life, support Vision. We support World Vision. We've adopted children through World Vision because I have a heart for the poor. I love the poor. The people that literally have nothing. We support Feed the Children. I got a deal working. Just went to Honduras, and about 2 months ago, took a group of about 20 people from our church. We have a missionary friend who's there. I want to tell you, the city of Don Lee is one of the poorest places you could ever know. I'm no world missions guy. But for the first time in my life, rather than just send a check to a really needy place, I was right there, walking the streets, holding the children. There's a little green house that sits in the middle of Don Lee. It's the church in Don Lee. Everyone on staff at the church does full-time work and comes there on a Friday night. That place gets packed. It's about the size of a 2-car garage, this home. They open it every Friday night, and people from all over. In our church, what we did was ministry all over the place. We were bringing kids. Listen, we had over 300 people surrounding this 2-car garage on a Friday night in Don Lee. And people were giving their lives to Christ. And now, as a result, we flew home. We've just gotten the whole plan approved from our board that we're going to adopt the city of Don Lee. Our goal is to transform Don Lee. It's going to be where all our emphasis goes. And so we have half the money now raised for them to buy a piece of land. In fact, I leave on October 24th to Don Lee again to look at the piece of land that the church wants to buy. Our church is going to support the pastor full-time so he can quit his job and become the pastor of that little church right there. And then we want to build the building, and we want to put the water system in. That's the deal that's working in the kingdom right now. It is awesome. Every DTS supporter has a stake in that, if Paul's correct. Every dime that's been given here affected me. And DTS produced a kingdom dealer. And you have a stake in that if Paul's true. What he says is true. Let me say this. DTS is another thing we support. I want to say something about that real quick, and I'll be done. Every year there's a new group of potential kingdom dealers that come here. And from what I understand in the last letter that I got from the president is we're at our highest enrollment, which means there are 1,900 potential kingdom dealers here. That's good news for investors, by the way. Because I know we need walls and buildings. I'm a pastor. I know you got to have walls and buildings and carpet and AC. You got to pay for that kind of stuff, but it's to provide an environment for you to do what you do, because really what matters is what you do. It's what you do. Hopefully you're a kingdom dealer and not just a student. I never looked at DTS as a potential eternal investment opportunity for almost 10 years after graduating here. And I think it's because as a student, I have memories of really having to scrape every dime, just to go. And when I left here, I couldn't imagine just sending money for nothing. Right? I gave you all I had when I was there, and it never dawned on me to look back. Right? I have a friend, Roger Mackey. He was a supervisor when I was an RA at Liberty University in Virginia. Hadn't seen him in years, but he was one of the ones that fanned the flame for me to come to DTS. He was like a personal cheerleader. Because I knew I was going to come here since I was in 11th grade, and I've known him since then. Anyway, he calls me out of the blue just a few years ago. He flies in. He's got his doctorate degree. Great guy. Can't wait to see him. We meet each other, haven't seen each other in over 10 years. And all he wants to know is, how did your DTS experience go? So we go out to dinner. And I tell him, I said, man, tears welled up in my eyes because when I think of this place, it's overwhelming to me what this place has done for me. And I said, oh, Roger, I got it. It was awesome. I was the quintessential student. I mean, I ate up every day. I got to tell you, I didn't waste very many minutes on this campus because I was looking forward to this since I was in 11th grade to be on this campus. And when I got here, it felt like I landed on the moon. I wanted to put a flag somewhere on this campus. And all 4.5 years I was here, I ate it up and loved it. And I told him that. And he said, oh, man, that is awesome. He said, do you support the seminary now? And I went, what? So what kind of question is that? He said, yeah, do you support the seminary now? I said, no. I said, I don't. He said, I just want to give you a thought. He didn't even have anything to do with Dallas Theological Seminary. He said, you know what? You know how important it is that alumni support the institution that they went from, even if for no other reason than the fact that they graduated from there and they know it better than anybody else? Do you know what crushed my heart when I called here and found out, because I wanted to know before I got here today, how many alumni support this seminary when they leave? It's only 14%. Well, 14%, no wonder they have to kill themselves up here to find people who don't even go here to figure out that's a great place. That seems absurd to me. And it seemed absurd to me and convicted me when the guy told me, when Roger says to me, man, you need to do it, not only because it's healthy for the school, but then I learned quickly about all the deals being made here. Let me ask you a question. How many of you sitting in here today already have a kingdom deal financially in your mind, in the works, or know of one coming? Look, lift your hand up. I want you to know whether you like it or not, I have a stake in that. I got a cut. And whatever God accomplishes through you. And think about how many of those people God is raising up in here to do that. This is a seedbed to see dividends in eternity. One of these days, if after this talk, the alumni really step up and the bucks come rolling in, maybe they'll invite me back. And I'll tell you a different talk, one of those hundreds that I thought about when I was walking in the door there. Yesterday, I attended the funeral of an elder in the church, the first church where the CPA was. He was 58 years old, died of a massive heart attack. It was a grand occasion because he was such a great guy. Dedicated his heart to people. And one of the things that it emerged, and everyone already knew it, but it couldn't help but come out in the ceremony, was what a giver he was. He used to carry around dollar bills, rolls of dollar bills, and hand them to his 6th grade class. Every time he'd point to them, they'd memorize a verse, and he'd give them $1 for it. He'd buy them a Bible every time they memorized 1 Corinthians 13. He just doled out cash. That's what he was like. He was almost like a walking ATM machine. He literally was. I had to leave the funeral early. Just get this. They just finished talking about this. I knew this thing was going to go on. I had an appointment that I had to get at. I left the service. I'm the only filled parking lot. I'm walking across, and in my mind is, Pete, you have got to start thinking about that roll of dollar bills and what happens to the dollars in your life. Where do they go? God's honest truth. I'm walking all by myself to my car, and I hear something rustling, and it's flying across the parking lot on the pavement. It sounds like a big leaf. I just glance. It's a beautiful day yesterday. It was $1 bill. It was a dollar bill. I picked up that dollar bill and I wrote Tom Williams' name on it, and it sits in my car, and I'm never going to spend it. It's going to be that $1 bill that reminds me, money just blows in the wind, folks. It passes. It's like the grass. It just will blow right by you. Or you can snatch it up and use it for eternity. I want to tell you, when I get to heaven, I want God to say, you were a kingdom dealer. I want to introduce you to some of the people that your money impacted. I cannot wait for that. I cannot wait for that. Because you soon learn in ministry, you can't do everything. But my dollars, God allows my dollars to do far more than I could ever do, to literally secure heaven, salvation for people. And everything you guys do, I want to be a part of. And I can be through just a simple gift. We don't give a lot because I didn't turn the corner on DTS till a long time in our giving. But as our giving grows, we will increase. You don't have to give a lot. You just got to do that. And I want to just say this. Alumni ought to do that. I appreciate your time.